Every now and then, we come upon a survival story so gruesome, awesome, and improbable that we can't help but wonder, how did they do that? In this video, we'll tell the story of Jeremy Evans, a lifelong hunter that had a nearly fatal encounter with a grizzly sow. Horribly mauled and at the mercy of the elements, Evans endured and fought for his life with a ferocity that not many people have, scrambling to put himself together, both figuratively and literally. Jeremy Evans not only survived, but he defied all odds. And when he felt like he couldn't do it anymore, his newborn daughter saved him. At 32 years old, Jeremy Evans was a lifelong experienced hunter. At that point in his life, in August 2017, he had been hunting for 17 years. Evans knew his way around nature better than most. His hunting trips would often take him deep into the bush of Alberta's Rockies in Canada, far away from most other hunters. To Evans, hunting was something to look forward to every year. It was something that took him out of the modern world and allowed him to live a more primal type of life, right in the middle of nature. Year after year, Evans would spend about 2 months running wild in the bush, hunting for deer, elk, moose, and sheep. He was an avid bow hunter, and he never ran out of luck. Until, as you can guess by now, he did. It was midnight on August 24, 2017, when Jeremy Evans left his home in Calgary, Alberta. He was going on a 3-night scouting trip in order to prepare for the opening day of ram hunting season. After loading his backpack and his mountain bike into his truck, Evans said his goodbyes to his wife Joyce and to their 6-month-old daughter. The man left home and drove some 3 hours to the spot where he'd park his truck. He was almost giddy, excited for the opening of the ram hunting season. His love for the outdoors was indeed huge, and if things went according to his plans, Evans was finally going to tag a ram. Jeremy Evans arrived at the parking spot at about 3 a.m. and left his truck. He put on his backpack and hopped on his mountain bike. He then started making his way down the trail, further into the wilderness of Alberta's Rockies. Alberta's Rockies are part of the Canadian Rocky Mountains. They are jagged mountains, cold and wet with moist soil, big rivers, and more glaciers than their American counterparts. But they're also spectacular mountains with scenery straight out of a fairy tale. Impressive peaks and alpine meadows, turquoise lakes, waterfalls, and a large number of wild animals make Alberta's Rockies one of the most beautiful places on Earth. And of course, Alberta's Rockies are beloved by hunters. Jeremy Evans knew exactly where he wanted to go scouting for sheep. The spot was about 7 to 9 miles away from his base camp. As he pedaled down the trail, Evans rode past 2 other hunters, one of which looked at him with a curious and somewhat baffled expression. Evans knew exactly why. It wasn't common for hunters to venture so deep into the bush, especially not on a bike. Still, Evans didn't abandon his plan. He proceeded to ride his bike into a far-back canyon. The canyon had a chilling nickname, the Crying Canyon, probably because of how steep and remote it was. But where others saw danger, Jeremy Evans saw the perfect opportunity for some fruitful sheep hunting. He liked that the canyon was so remote. That meant no one would interfere with his hunting. He had a clear strategy: let other hunters, those who wouldn't venture that deep into the wild, scare the sheep right into his sights. Once he reached the canyon, Jeremy Evans spotted a few sheep in the distance. He stopped, got out his binoculars, and started watching the unsuspecting animals. The early morning air, the scenery, and the animals made for a beautiful feeling. Evans was happy. He stood there watching the sheep for more than 10 minutes before bringing his binoculars down to shift his position. But as he brought the binoculars down, Evans saw something that he immediately knew meant trouble. There it was, just a little brown thing running toward him. A bear cub, the man knew straight away. And where there's a bear cub, there's also a protective mama bear. Evans felt a sense of doom overcoming him, but he couldn't despair, not just yet. Instead of letting himself succumb to dread, the man slowly reached out into his backpack to grab his bear spray. There wasn't enough time to reach the bear spray, which was somewhere deep in his backpack. Even if he had somehow managed to reach it, he couldn't have used it anyway. Despite his experience with the outdoors, Evans had inexplicably failed to clip his bear spray on before venturing into the wild. With his bear spray out of reach and his gun unloaded, Evans knew he was in big trouble. And then he heard it, a little crack coming from somewhere behind. The man looked over his right shoulder and was met with a terrifying sight. There it was, a crazed-looking grizzly sow, charging at him. The grizzly was less than 4 feet away. In an instant, it got near Evans and raised one of its paws. If Evans had any doubts about the grizzly's intent, and that's highly improbable, they were long gone now. The bear's mouth was wide open, its powerful canines in full display. Its eyes rolled back in its head. In a flash, Jeremy Evans grabbed his bicycle and set it in front of the sow. He also grabbed his backpack and tried to use it to keep the bear at bay. His plan worked, but only momentarily. The man then grabbed his backpack and started hitting the grizzly over its head while also pushing its face away from him. But it wasn't enough. The bear managed to grab a hold of both the backpack and one of Evans' hands, piercing right through with its massive teeth. They fought like that for a little longer, until the bite got shaken off and the bear backed away about 30 feet. Evans struggled to get a hold of his gun and loaded. The bear seemingly walked away. In reality, though, the fight was far from over. In a matter of seconds, the grizzly charged again. Evans threw away his backpack and booked it up the mountainside. His instincts told him to find a tree and climb it. That's why he jumped off the ground and started climbing a spruce tree. But with one of his legs dangling low, the bear saw this as a great opportunity to attack. All of a sudden, Evans felt a set of powerful teeth sinking in behind his right knee and ripping him away from the tree. The man hit the ground with a loud thud. The bear grabbed Evans' left side and tossed all 250 pounds of him some 6 feet away. He had to play dead. Everyone said it was the best thing to do in the eventuality of a grizzly attack. He curled himself into a fetal position and waited to see if the sow would leave him alone. But as Evans lay there on his left side, the bear bit his face. No, it didn't just bite his face. In fact, the powerful jaws clamped down and pulled the whole side of Evans' face, including his left eye. Evans couldn't help but think that playing dead was a pretty damn hard thing to do, with a massive grizzly chewing on your face. That's when he started fighting. He started punching the bear, grabbing its ears, poking its eyeballs. He stuck his fingers in the bear's nose and punched his hand into her mouth. The bear was in distress, gagging and throwing up. The smell was horrible, something akin to horse manure and wet dog, but it didn't stop. Evans then hit its belly and took a hold of something he couldn't quite recognize. Still, he grabbed, twisted, and pulled it, which made the bear finally give up. Squealing, the sow took off running through the bush and up into the mountains. Evans shot up and hurried toward his backpack. He took a hold of his phone and snapped a selfie to see just how bad the bear got him. And it was bad. Chunks of the left side of his face were simply ripped out. The man then pulled out his gun. He thought about hunting some sheep. Obviously, Evans was in shock, and while he could see his injuries were severe, he couldn't quite feel the pain yet. But there was a chunk missing in his inner thigh, and all the tendons in his right leg were severed. Jeremy Evans started putting rounds into his gun's clip, but as he was loading his gun, something happened. Unbeknownst to him, the bear sneaked up behind him. It took his head in its mouth and dragged Jeremy Evans backward up the hillside. The grizzly then ripped a large chunk of skin on the right side of the man's face, using its claws. It also managed to rip his ear. As the bear chewed on his head, Jeremy Evans was giving in to his fate. He thought that was it. He thought he was going to die, and he was strangely okay with it. But when the bear shifted its position, Evans fell on the ground, and something happened to his body. It was no longer numb. It was like something simply reattached when he made contact with the ground. With its newfound power, the man could once again move his arms. His eyes were another matter altogether. His left eye was hanging out of its socket. As for his right eye, Evans wasn't sure he had one anymore. In reality, it was there, but it was pulled into the man's skull. Everything was blurry. The bear loomed like a dark shadow over Evans' body. Suddenly, the man grabbed the bear, wrapped his legs around its neck, and squeezed as hard as he could. The bear ran away, squealing in pain. Jeremy Evans crawled downhill, searching for his backpack. He tried loading his gun, but he couldn't find his clip. His injuries were massive. The man even contemplated taking his own life, but when he brought the gun to his head, it didn't fire. Evans took it as a sign to keep going. He grabbed each piece of skin he could find and placed them all on his skull. He wrapped everything up in a sweater to make sure the pieces wouldn't fall off. He couldn't walk, he couldn't see. He was missing chunks of his body. He was alone in the forest. He was dying. Still, he endured and struggled on. At one point, he found an outfitter's camp. He tore through the place looking for a radio or a sat phone. He couldn't find any. Jeremy Evans had to crawl over 7 miles until he reached his truck. He was arguably more dead than alive. Still, he drove for some 13 more miles until he found a family-owned lodge. The lodge's owner owned and knew how to fly a helicopter and agreed to take Evans to the hospital. While he waited for the helicopter to arrive, Evans tried to go fishing. Needless to say, the people at the lodge didn't let him do that. Jeremy Evans spent 5 weeks at the hospital. At first, doctors were certain he was going to succumb to his injuries sometime during his first night at the hospital. He didn't. Evans survived. Even more, he managed to do some hunting only 2 days after leaving the hospital. He was back at work only 7 weeks after the attack, with incredibly minimal injuries. After the attack, Jeremy Evans went on to write a book describing the events of August 24, 2017, and the lessons he's come to learn ever since.